Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. In my daily show, I interview today's latest best-selling, buzziest, or underrated authors and story creators whose work I think is worth your time. As a bookstore owner, publisher, author, and obviously podcaster, I get a comprehensive look at everything that's coming out and spend my time curating the best books so you don't have to. Stay in the know, get insider insights, and connect with guests like I do every single day. For more information, go to zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. Dara Horn is the author of One Little Goat, A Passover Catastrophe, and People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted President. Dara is the award-winning author of 6 books, including People Love Dead Jews, which was a New York Times notable book in 2001. One of Granta Magazine's best young American novelists, she is the recipient of 3 National Jewish Book Awards, among other honors, and she was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, the Wingate Prize, the Simpson Family Literary Prize, and the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. Her nonfiction work has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Smithsonian Tablet, and the Jewish Review of Books, among many other publications. Dara received her doctorate in comparative literature from Harvard University, studying Yiddish and Hebrew. She currently serves as creative advisor for the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History. She lives in New Jersey with her family. Welcome, Dara. Thank you so much for coming on Totally Booked with Zibby to talk about your latest book, One Little Goat, illustrated also by Theo Ellsworth, and then also People Love Dead Jews, because I just read that too. So we have to talk about it.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so in both books, you talk about how as a kid, you wanted to stop time essentially, and how at the end of every day you had this sort of anxiety really that it was like you could never get that day back and what happens to all those past days. And I totally relate to that. Like, oh my gosh, so much. Talk about that and how it motivates some of your deep digging into history and the tell and everything else.
Yes. So, this was what motivated me as a writer, was this overwhelming sense of time. And, as you said, when I was a child, sort of constantly feeling like this was slipping through my fingers, which is a bizarre thing to think when you're 6. You'd think you'd feel that when you were much older, but I was feeling this when I was 6, and feeling also, as I put it, what this day that disappeared, where did it go? And, feeling, very, disturbed by this. And when I was writing as a child, I was always writing, it was documenting. That was I wasn't motivated by making up stories, although of course I've since then published 5 novels, and now this book, but that wasn't my prime motivation. It was capturing time. And, and growing up in the Jewish community and in this tradition, I felt very fortunate to discover many, many centuries of people who, to my child's mind, seem to have solved this problem. Because what I've discovered in Jewish tradition is this extremely deep historical consciousness, where it isn't even just an awareness of the past or, oh, this is a long tradition. There's this, and this part, I was not articulating these things when I was 6, just so you know, I'm not prodigy. But
just to shame us and what all our kids are doing.
No, I was not reading, Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi at 6. But, at some point when I was reading Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, who's this, great modern Jewish historian, passed away fairly recently in the past, 10 years. He has this book called Zachor, which means to remember. And he says in that the idea of history is kind of alien to Jewish tradition, because in Jewish tradition, the foundation isn't history, it's memory. Mm-hmm. And what he means by that is, he has a line in that book where he says, and I'm going to not get the wording right, but it's something like, in Jewish tradition, the past was not a series of events to be contemplated at a distance, but rather a series of situations into which one is existentially drawn.
I get it.
And that is very much my experience of Jewish life. And it's very much the way the tradition is designed, right? So you have this idea that it wasn't just that generation of Israelites who were standing at Sinai to take, to receive the Torah. It was all of their future descendants, and of course, for this, Passover related book, it's this idea that, in every generation we see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt. Each person is obligated to see themselves as if they personally came out of Egypt. And I was tapping into that and to the idea of the tell, which, I'm sure get to this. It's very foundational to this new book I just published, One Little Goat. A tell is an archaeological mound that's made out of layers of civilization, and you find these in Israel where there's like it's like an artifice. It looks like a hill from the outside, but it's actually an artificial hill because it's all these ruins of different civilizational layers, one on top of the other, and so that the most recent layers are at the top, and then the oldest are at the very bottom. And to me, this was sort of this metaphor for Jewish life, and it's something I see in many different ways. As a writer, I mean, as a scholar of Jewish literature, I studied my doctorate's in Hebrew and Yiddish literature. Like you see it in the language people use, where there's layers and layers, and I was thinking about this as I was writing One Little Goat, which is my first book for, as we say, young readers. Mm-hmm. And because I feel like there's a reason why a lot of popular children's literature is some form of portal fiction. Right, where it's like, there's some portal to some world that's bigger than yours, right? You go to this, the track in King's Cross Station, and then there's like, a secret door, there's the door to Narnia in the back of the wardrobe. Like, there's a reason for that, which I think is that children's lives are very constrained, right? I mean, and they're always looking for some some access point to get to this bigger world that's bigger than theirs. And that was my experience as a child, because I feel like, first of all, all children's lives are very constrained, but also I think there's something about American life in particular, which really pushes you to just be living in the present all the time. Like there's almost a rejection of history, this idea that like, oh, we're always making progress and, the best is ahead. And, it doesn't matter where your parents came from. It's what you do with the new opportunities you have. I mean, whether this is true or not irrelevant, this is like the ethos of the country. And in Judaism, it's kind of the opposite. I felt like I found that portal I wouldn't have been able to use this language, but as a child, like I found that sort of outlet. I found where the disappearing days were inside this tradition.
Wow. Well, the way you visually depicted it and with such humor in the book, I can't wait to give this to my kids to read, but it's good for grownups too. I mean, yes. It's just another way of framing it. And I always think about this too, when we're at Seder, like how many Seders, like what's going on in this part of the world and what happened in this person's family. And it's like mind boggling the scope of it, right? And it's all going on at the same time. And by you having the goat and the main character sort of go into his family life in different parts, and then Sigmund Freud's mom and like all these places through history just to sort of understand where he is right then and to get a better context for his own family. It was like a genius way to reframe it and make it funny. And I love the scapegoat. I mean, it was, it's such an original way to tell a story that has literally probably been told more than any other story ever.
Thank you. Well, yes, I mean, yes, it's because as you know, in publishing, it's like you have to be like, it's not even just like, oh, this is a children's book versus an adult book. It's like, oh, this is middle grade. Oh, this is, young adult. Obviously, like, for the publisher's sake, like this is a book for, ages, whatever to whatever. You're right. It's a book for anybody. And I mean, the reality is like, I feel like this is a book I was born to write. I mean, this is like my, I don't know, 7th or 8th book. I don't know. And all my other books are dealing with the same question, right? About how you find yourself all my books are about Jewish culture, but it's all my books are about this sort of question of how the past lives within the present. This is just like the most direct version of it. Yep. And, and as you say, the funniest. And I don't know if we want to say a little more about just what the frame is.
Frame the story. Yes.
Yeah. So this One Little Goat, it's a graphic novel for young readers, whatever that means. It's for whatever reader you want, anybody who knows how to read, basically. It is a book about a family who's at their Passover Seder, and they cannot find the afikomen, which is this piece of matzah that's hidden during the meal and that's needed to end this ceremony of the Seder. And because no one can find this afikomen, the Seder cannot end. And so this family is trapped at the Seder for 6 months. which for anyone who's been to like, a long boring Seder, like it's kind of a familiar feeling. So, there's, and also you could sort of tell I started thinking about this idea during COVID. So this family's trapped at this never ending Seder, and 6 months in, there's a knock on the door, and they're like, oh, maybe it's Elijah the prophet, who's, this, legendary idea that this, prophet shows up at the end of the Seder. But they're like, it can't be Elijah the prophet because we're not up to that part of the Seder yet. The word Seder means order. There's, and it's like, well, no, it can't be. And so the oldest child goes to answer the door, and it's a talking goat who says, I'm the scapegoat. I'm the reason for everyone's problems. And he says, I can help you find your afikomen. I think I know where it is. And then the kid's like, great, where is it? And then the goat says, no, not where, when? And then he says, over the past 6 months, while you've been sitting at this never-ending Seder, thousands of years of previous Seders have accumulated underneath your Seder. And you now have to travel down into those previous Seders to find this missing piece of matzah and bring your Seder to an end. So, and yes, as you said, it becomes a journey through, it starts as a journey through his family's history, and it continues as a journey through Jewish history, which is essentially also his family's history, until you get to the night before the Exodus at the very end.
My gosh. Well, it was so cool. And even like acknowledging the bravery of his great grandmother in the Warsaw Ghetto, and like all the times where Passovers weren't always so easy, right? Because of course the whole story is that it is not easy. I recently had Rabbi Raphael Shore on this podcast, and he was talking again, just like you, like at Sinai, like we were all given how to behave. We were all like not just one person. And that is why we all go into the world trying to do good and all these things. And it's the mandate. It's like in our DNA. And that's sort of how we've ended up here, even though there are always, like in your other book, there are always forces against us. So
yes. Well, and it's a story of, yes, the great grandmother in the Warsaw Ghetto is a moment of bravery, but they're all moments of bravery.
Yes.
Right? Because that's, and sometimes it's, in these dramatic historical circumstances, sometimes it's, personal choices.
Yep.
But, all of us are, the only reason that we are still Jews today, those of us who are participating in this tradition, is because of these courageous choices that everybody before us made. Right? Even in the best of circumstances, this was a countercultural choice for sure. And anybody who's raising Jewish children know that like this is, it's an enormous amount of effort to maintain this tradition, even in, whatever version of that tradition it looks like, it's a countercultural practice. And so, yeah, it's always a matter of bravery. And also the Passover story is actually really scary.
Yes.
It's a really scary story. And it's very, this is also very countercultural now, where it's like, this is a really scary story. And not only are we like not giving people trigger warnings, like the children are like the focus of this idea in this story.
Yes.
And that I think is also, very empowering.
The literal depiction of the firstborn child and the lamb's blood and all of that. And, some of the skeletons and, all this, it's like, okay, yeah, this is not like a sweet bedtime story.
Oh, no.
But it's supposed to always be a wake-up call. Like we can never forget. We have to retell it over and over. And there are reasons why. And then, of course, things play out today and we at least have the context for it. Right, like we know, maybe everybody else doesn't know. And as we are seeing in culture today, people don't totally get the whole story or understand, but we all know. It's in us. It's like part of the mandate is to know and learn and repeat.
Well, it's part of the story, right?
Yeah.
It's part of the story. And, this is, there's another part of the Passover liturgy in the Haggadah where it says, that in every generation, people have risen up to destroy the nation of Israel, and God always saves us from their hands. So, that's obviously, that's a religious frame for this idea, but there's a sense in which this tradition is not just about the past, but about preparing you. Mm-hmm. It's about preparing you for living in this countercultural civilization.
It's funny to think of it as countercultural. And like, for me, it's just cultural.
Oh, but I think this is true for, this is what Jewish civilization is. This is an ancient this is an ancient Near Eastern civilization. There are lots of ancient Near Eastern civilizations. And, the radical ideas of this are countercultural, right? The radical idea of monotheism, right? Refusal to bow to idols. We think of that today as like this, again, it's like, oh, it's a spiritual, it's a religious thing. This is a political movement in the ancient Near East where, all these other cultures in the ancient Near East had lots of gods. And one of the gods is the dictator, right? I mean, that's what the Passover story is about, is the Pharaoh thinks that he's a god, right? All of these plagues and things are about the Pharaoh being defeated and revealed to not be a god. I mean, that is sort of the idea of that. And when the Jews in the ancient Near East said that they don't bow to idols, what they meant was that they don't bow to tyrants, because that's what, quote, other gods were in that time. And, that's when, and so this has always been this sort of anti-tyrannical movement, which is going to piss off tyrants. And that has always been true. So when I say counterculture, this is a culture that is not conforming to whether it's an empire or whatever, just a dominant society that goes to that dominant society and says, no, thanks. That is a very radical thing to do, and it is never going to make you popular. But it is sort of this ultimate expression of integrity and freedom. And to me, that's what the Passover story really is about, is that the integrity and how to live a life of integrity and freedom and how to teach that to your children.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, I feel like this is a good Haggadah, Haggadah plus, right? This should be at every seat at Passover, and will open up conversations, I feel like, in a different way for people's families to connect, and just another way into it that feels at once personal and universal.
Yes, and I think also, I mean, as you said, like, it's also like, it's a lot of fun.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I'm sitting here talking about integrity and freedom, but, as you said, like, this is a book where, like, you don't meet Freud, but you meet Freud's mom. Right. And she's like, he never calls.
It's the whole thing is hilarious when you're like the tired mom, and I'm like, feel seen. Thank you for that. As I like flash back to kids, small kids, and other Seders, and I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone is a character. And
right, and those are like their names. There's like, the exhausted mom. There's like, the opinionated aunt who's like, mom, slavery is corporate greed.
Totally. Oh my gosh, so funny. And how did you come to work with Theo Ellsworth on this?
Oh my God. So this was, I feel so fortunate to be working with him. This was an idea that, I had this idea at one point and then kind of backburnered it, didn't really think about it. And then I was on a road trip with my family. We stopped in a comic book shop, and my kids came out with armloads of all these indie comics, including a really thick indie comic by Theo Ellsworth called Capacity. And they were fighting over this book. Like, it was like, oh, it's my turn for it. No, you already had it. And it was like, they could not get enough of this book. And I was like, what is this book that you guys bought? I don't know anything about comics. This is not my world. And I kind of borrowed it from them at one point just to be like, what are you all obsessed with? I was just enchanted by his artwork. Like, first of all, hilarious, right? And he does these things where he makes these, abstract ideas really literal. I remember a page in that book where it was called Walking Around with a Yelling Brain. And it was like this man who had his head was like zipped open, and there was this like other man who was popping out of his head, and like it was like, then that man had another zipper on his head. It was just like really interesting and fun and incredibly detailed and really beautiful and haunting. And I just remember thinking, like, when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I see how this idea that I have could work. And I cold emailed him. I'm like, your name is Theo Ellsworth. You live in Missoula, Montana. You're probably not Jewish. I'm like, okay, I'm going to, I have this. I wrote to him. I'm like, hi, I love your work. I'm a writer. I have this idea. It's a little hard to explain. Deep breath. And he was totally game. Just so fantastic. Came up with all kinds of things I would never have thought of. It was, working with him was just amazing. He did a fantastic job. And he's an amazing artist.
Wow. Well, congratulations. It's very cool and fun and entertaining, but so much more than that. So I feel like it fits right in the graphic novel trend, with kids who can't even be bothered to read novels anymore. So yeah, how cool. Just, it's so nice to have a different way to think about things after so long. And just to touch on People Love Dead Jews, you're probably so tired of talking about it. I was struck, I read part of it over the break when I was in California. And then in reviewing part of it today, there's a whole scene where you're driving through the Palisades, which gave me goosebumps, right? You're on Amalfi Drive. And
oh my God, yes.
All of that. In fact, then I went on Instagram to see what happened to those houses that you mentioned. Now I can't remember the name, but now I'm following them. But
Aurora and yeah.
But you talk about that in the context of how there was this one man who was such a helper and his whole story, Frederick.
Vernon Fry.
Right,
Yes.
sorry.
One of the only Americans, as we used to call righteous Gentiles, right? Who's one of the only Americans who was involved in rescuing people from Nazi persecution. Yeah.
Yeah, and how he basically perpetuated this artistic and literary community, relocated to California. And yet, why is he not known so publicly? I mean, there's so many people who have helped and so many people who have heard, but like, let's broadcast that story. I'm like, where is the documentary on this guy?
I don't happen. I mean, there's been some things. Actually, now since the book came out, somebody made a Netflix series actually about him.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well now I can go watch that.
Yeah, which I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen, but yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, tell me about when you wrote that book. It was obviously a couple years ago. You were responding still to the synagogue massacre. Now things have gotten arguably worse, but of course,
I wouldn't call that.
It's all relative. It's all relative. And you said in the book you've sort of become this reluctant op-ed person about all of this stuff. And you didn't necessarily want to, but you're like, at least I know my history and I might as well be the person. So talk about it, how you've sort of emerged as this source and how your perspective on everything is so important and original and all of that.
Oh, God. So People Love Dead Jews, which, I still can't believe my publisher let me keep that title. People Love Dead Jews is a book about the role that dead Jews play in non-Jewish society. I hadn't even really thought about it as a book about anti-Semitism, but what this phrase means essentially is that most non-Jewish societies only find Jews acceptable when Jews are powerless, whether that means politically impotent or dead. And I started thinking about this, like in 2018, I was asked by Smithsonian Magazine to write a long piece for them about Anne Frank, and I was dreading that assignment. And I remember thinking, like, why don't I want to do this? And I remember this news story that I had read about something that happened at the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam, where there was a young Jewish man working at that museum. The museum wouldn't let him wear his yarmulke to work. They made him hide it under a baseball hat. And he appealed the decision to the board of the museum. The board of the museum deliberated for 6 months and then let him wear his yarmulke to work. And I'm like, 6 months, long time for the Anne Frank Museum to ponder whether or not it was a good idea to force a Jew into hiding. And I'm like, and then I found out something even similar had happened 6 months earlier with the museum's audio guide display, where they have, 15 languages to the audio guide. It says, English, there's a British flag, Francais, there's a French flag, and then you get to Hebrew. No flag. I mean, they've since fixed these things, but I'm like, these are PR mishaps, but they're not mistakes. Mm. And that was where I got this, the first line of that essay is like, people love dead Jews, living Jews, not so much. But I've now, and the refined idea of this is that, yes, Jews are only acceptable when they're powerless, when they're politically impotent, or when they're dead. And I published this book in 2021, and I just thought this was like, a sort of a detour from my fiction. I had published 5 novels before this, and I was like, okay, I'm going to just get this out of my system. This book has eaten my life. And since this book came out, I mean, it was like just inundated with, first of all, Jewish readers who were all coming to me with their horror stories. I'm like, I'm not a therapist. I don't even know like what I can possibly do for you. And, realized from that, like how much huger this problem was than I ever thought it was. And also being, inundated with non-Jewish readers who were all, yes, I get hate mail and all of that, but like non-Jewish readers who were basically saying, wow, I had no idea. How can I help? And, so this book sort of made me into this national voice on this issue. And then, after October 7th, and I should say already I was sort of like this book turned, I was, I was one of the people who was contributing in the Biden administration to like this, whatever their national plan was to combat anti-Semitism, which I have to say, I don't know that anyone ever did anything with this plan. But I wrote, 5 or 6 pages of that plan. I was like sort of involved in a lot of things that, a person who just wrote a comic book about a talking goat, you would not expect to be involved in. And then like that just exploded after October 7th. So, in terms of what happened to me after that, the first thing that happened was I was asked to, and I participated in this anti-Semitism advisory group to the now former president of Harvard, who did not take our advice, unfortunately. And it went really badly. In fact, it went so badly that then I got hauled into Congress to testify about it. So, I'm like now part of this, and I was part of this congressional investigation. I now have people just asking me constantly about this. And I'm doing public speaking all the time about this topic in many, many audiences. And what I just started noticing was like the way I'm talking about this is very different from other people, because it would often happen. It happened just this week at another college. I speak at these college campuses, and there'll be people who show up in like, their keffiyeh, and they start, heckling me, like asking hostile questions. And I just answer the questions. And then they say, wow, I never thought about it that way. Thank you. And then they come to me afterwards. They're like, this was really interesting. Where can I go to learn more? And then I would have like non-Jewish readers at these events coming to me being like, wow, what you just said, this was amazing. Can you come speak to my school? Can you come speak to my teachers union? And I was just like, no, because like I'm me, and I got a plane to go to Phoenix tomorrow, and I don't have like a staff, and this is just like I'm a novelist whose next book is about a talking goat, right? This is like, no, I'm not like, well. And so what I now actually have done is I've started a nonprofit to address this issue and to sort of scale what I've been doing in terms of changing this conversation. And it's called Mosaic Persuasion. And the goal is to educate the broader American public about who Jews are, because that's what I saw was completely missing. It's like, there are all these places where it's like, you are required to learn about the Holocaust in school. You're not required to learn who Jews are. That we've outsourced to TikTok. So, this is like a broader education problem, because I don't think that there's any possibility of combating it. You can't even understand what anti-Semitism is without understanding Jewish civilization, because it does have to do with this idea of opposition to tyranny. And I now have I have a whole framework for it, because what I realize is the whole way that people are addressing this problem is on the anti-Semitic terms of the dominant culture. And that once you disrupt that frame, suddenly the whole conversation changes and people understand what you're talking about and see the problem. So we're starting this in K-12. We have like workshops for teachers and stuff. If any of your listeners are educators or involved in, whether it's in school or in museums or interfaith groups or social media channels, we are building this out. So, but yeah, we're very new. Don't even have a website yet, but you can contact me through my website at darahorn.com if you're interested in this initiative. So yeah.
Wow, that is super exciting. I will contact you through your website. Yes. I am interested. That is great. Clearly, what we're doing now is not working. So by shifting the framework, hopefully we have more success.
Yes. Well, and I think that this, this is really a problem that is the reason, and it's a larger problem in our society, because it's about the limits of living in a pluralistic democracy, right? It's like this test case for what does it mean to live with people who don't all agree. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this is a broader problem in American culture with the way this culture is polarized, and sort of being able to be in conversation with people who are coming from a lot of different places and who don't agree with each other. And that is like something that Jewish tradition offers a masterclass in that.
Wow. Okay. I was already so impressed with you, but just even getting to listen to you, I feel like I'm taking my own masterclass here. I feel like you should be teaching. You must teach, right? You must teach.
I have in the past, but, as I said, like, this is why, like, I need to figure out how to scale what I'm doing, because right now it's like, I have taught in universities and things in the past, like, courses, but I teach courses in like, Yiddish and Hebrew literature. Right. That's actually what my academic work is, but, need to be able to scale what I'm doing. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's keep talking. Not now, but like offline. I want to keep talking about what you're doing.
I'd love to, yes.
And congratulations on One Little Goat. Totally enjoyed it. We'll be sending it to everybody in my family, extended family.
Way more fun than people have done.
Yes. Yeah. A nice sort of counterbalance. So thank you, Dara. This was really great. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. Okay. Bye. To be continued. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you loved the show, tell a friend, leave a review, follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and spread the word. Thanks so much. Oh, and buy the books.